About to find out what debut is happening now. Welcome to the interview series of Debut, a fusion of storytelling and play. We're setting up for the date of March 28th, but you might be asking, even though everybody's talking about it, at least we hope they are, what is Debut? Debut is where we have three accomplished storytellers to tell a story. But it's unlike any experience because they've never, ever told this story in public before. This will be their debut of this story, not their debut as a storyteller. And we have some amazing storytellers with us today, and we want to invite you to come and see the show on March 28th. After they tell their story, they'll work with me. Some say, I'm a practitioner of play. I know I'm a practitioner of play. We like to have fun. And so, for about 10 to 15 minutes afterwards, we'll play with that story's direction. And who knows? We'll also get comments from you that may help the direction of that story. It's designed as a public playground concert, and I am excited about our next guest here, or our guest on Debut's interview series. I'd like to first speak about our teller. She really speaks to the value of the traditional tale. Rachel Ann Harding is a traditional storyteller who's passionate about telling. She brings in music and accompaniment, and I have heard her personally. And honestly, once you hear Rachel Ann Harding, you'll wonder why you're not listening to more traditional tellers and traditional tales. It is my pleasure to bring to you Rachel Ann Harding. Hi, Rach.
Hi, thank you for such a lovely introduction.
Sure. No, it's great. It's great to have you on the debut interview series, and I so appreciate what you do to bring traditional tales to the forefront. But others might not know about that. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit, and even highlight your podcast.
So those are the two aspects of things that I'm very passionate about. I found traditional storytelling, and that's what I want to do. And has been my focus of storytelling for throughout my storytelling career. But the other piece that I love is podcasting. I produce and am the producer of the Story podcast, which also features other great storytellers, not only storytellers from around the United States, but around the world. And it's focused on traditional folk and fairy tale and bringing the recordings of people who tell these stories to hopefully a broader audience.
And there must be a reason that you are so passionate about traditional tales and those who tell traditional stories. Well, give us a little history of Rachel's background that brought her to there.
So some of the first it's a bit classic in the sense that my mother and my grandmother were the first ones that fed me traditional tales. My mother read them to us, and my grandmother would cut out these clippings of traditional tales that were printed in her newspaper in California. It was just a section of the Long Beach newspaper. And whenever she would send us care packages, which included cookies and goodies and comics, it also included the pieces of storytelling, the traditional tales that were cut out. And there are some stories that I read when I was a child that I have only just found again. But it really got me on the path of thinking in story and thinking about traditional folk and fairy tales.
You know, I think I know the series. It was called Let Me Tell You a Story, a syndicated series. And it was in
Yes.
California. It was all over the country. I had a landlord once. We had the Guatemala plate. So he also taught with me at the high school, and he would put on the Guatemala plate when I leave a treat, coffee. And, one day I had a brown envelope with hundreds of Let Me Tell You a Story of the series, and I still have it. And
Oh,
there's also two
that's so
books
cool.
that have been made as a result of that. And so it's wonderful to see that this kind of grabbed you and said, I want to keep traditional stories alive. And
Mhm.
who what kind of traditional tales, when you dive into a traditional tale, what is your process?
So so when I get a book of traditional folk and fairy tales, it's a little bit like speed dating. I read through it and it's like having a conversation with the story. And if there's a piece of that story that grabs me, sometimes it will be s- a, a part that I just really would love to tell, something that feels very visceral, very real, beautiful stories with smells and spices or sights that you can describe or walk through. A lot of it is emotion. If the characters go through a really understandable arc of emotion that I can connect with, that's what will call me to a piece. And then sometimes it's the characters. I have a deep fondness for the kitsune, the shape-shifting fox from Japan, and I've started to collect those stories because I find all of them, even the ones that are, the kitsune is not always kind. So some of them get a little aggressive, but a lot of them are really beautiful. So I speed date the stories and then I start a relationship with them. So writing and practicing and then finding opportunities to tell them.
I love that you said you start with like finding the senses and the tricksters and of the world origins. I mean, sometimes we paint the traditional tellers as like one plane, and they're
Mhm.
so we can give flesh to them. Vi Hilbert, who was a Saskill elder, said, we have the bare bones of the story, but the teller provides the flesh and the layers of the story. So I'm
Mhm.
sure you've had the great fortune of listening to some traditional tellers or tellers that honor the tradition. Can you share one or two of those stories, and then maybe what you took from it?
So the stories themselves that have really impacted me, it's fun to see how they've changed throughout my experience because there are some tellers who will share a story that feels like medicine to me, and some stories that I only tell because they feel like medicine to me. And then there are some that are just delightful and hang on throughout my whole career. Claire Murphy tells the story of the vices and the virtues, and that one seems to really connect with everybody, and this feeling that the vices and the virtues were the first to be in the world, and they scattered about and they play a game of hide and seek, and it explains things about love and madness. um, I think another teller that really impacted me in the sense of discovering my own style. So I worked with Liz Weir in Ireland when I first started telling. I went over to Ireland and studied with her for a month, which really got me firmly started. She was my gatekeeper, one
She's a
to
great
invite
teacher, man.
me in. Oh,
Mm.
she was incredible. And then in developing my own style, when I saw Janice Del Negro tell for the first
Mm.
time, that's when I very rarely cry during stories, even touching ones. I'm just like, yes, that's beautiful. But with Janice's stories, I could sometimes feel like I wanted to cry. There was just a sense of really grounded wordplay and love of the environment and the characters. So I see both that Liz Weir and Janice Del Negros as my mentors in storytelling.
Both of them have a commanding presence and in
Mhm.
different ways. I mean, Janice is very dynamic. It's like, whoa. And Liz could be very welcoming. Not, I mean, everyone, and Janice could be welcoming as well. I have the good fortune in the 20, 25 years that I've been working, met three people that I call like the story lives in them. I remember at
Mhm.
Jonesboro, this tall, lanky Appalachian man. I was really new in storytelling, so I wasn't sure what I was seeing. Sat on a log and began telling a jack tale, and obviously that was Ray Hicks. And it took me a while to sink in and listen and hear that jack tale unfold in someone who lives the jack tale.
Mhm.
And then Brother Blue. I met Brother Blue and he wouldn't let you leave when you tell a story. I remember he started this story and we said, well, we have to go. And we were like 15, 20 minutes. And his wife, Ruth, was sitting there and he said, the boy needs to leave. But he was mesmerizing. His eyes would make you stop. And then Estefanes Martinez, whose name was
Mm.
Blue Water. And she would tell stories from New Mexico called string stories or mini stories. And she said, I had two things at a boarding school. She was Native American of the San Juan Pueblos. And she said, I have string and I have dirt. So I use strings to tell story. And they created an entire festival called String Fiesta.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
So as we're sharing the tradition, and I think there are tellers that honor the tale, but then there's some that sink into them. And
Mhm.
I've been fortunate to hear those, and I think we're stronger. If someone wants to reach in and find a traditional tale, I love what you said about it has to grab them emotionally,
Mhm.
sensory, look at different versions. What advice do you have for them?
There are many different ways to go about this. Um, One of them that I've heard is listen to tellers, listen to people at festivals, on radio shows, on podcasts. Um, Listen to as many tellers as possible, and you'll start to hear stories and understand why they grab you. You'll start to understand which stories, and so many of these traditional tales are public domain. And when I first started, I remember hearing Lynn Ford before I knew who Lynn Ford
An
was,
Ohio teller?
telling
We're in Ohio.
you know, I heard her do the story of Anansi and Common Sense.
Hmm.
And I was a preschool teacher at the time, and I told that to my kids. But it was so helpful for me to use her language to access the story until I felt comfortable enough with it to bring it to my own words. And then the other is to read. To read, there's a lot of compilations of traditional folk and fairy tale, but also read some of the new traditionals. Like Jane Yolen is an excellent example of one who takes traditional folk and fairy tropes or even tales and fractures them or works with them to create something new. So listening and reading, and then making sure you get out there and tell. There's a lot of open mics that are now happening online that did not happen before, but can give you an opportunity every week to bring a tale out and tell it to a really compassionate, loving audience who wants you to succeed and will be encouraging through any kind of stumbling or thinking or missteps that might happen in your language as you're trying out and learning the path of a new story.
So, Rich, there's room for personal tales, myths, traditional tales, all on the same stage, don't you think?
I do, because not everybody in the audience is going to have a fondness for one or the other, but you want them to be exposed to. I might bring my partner to a traditional storytelling festival, and he'll be really captivated by tall tales or personal tales. And to give that space for the audiences to mingle, I think is vital to bringing storytelling as an art form further into like our culture and our minds.
Do you think small pockets? I mean, because at one point there was this big talk that personal tales are going to override traditional tales. But I see if we pledge ourselves, sort of like you're doing, to honor the commitment of traditional tales, we can bring that renaissance, can't we?
Absolutely, because I this whole concept of traditional tales dying is, will music ever die?
Right.
Will folk music ever pass away? It may transform. I've been watching the series Country Music by Ken Burns with my partner, and it's amazing to see the transformation and how it's turned into all these different avenues of exploration for musicians. And I feel the same way about personal tales and traditional. And it was something that one of the other reasons I started the podcast is there's a lot of, I can see a lot of concern about personal tales overtaking traditional tales. And really, it's audience education. It's how do we get this out and find the people who are lit up like we are in ways that they'll find it. And so it really isn't a competition. It's just, stick to what you love and share that, and you will find people who want to hear it.
I remember sitting in the Jonesboro tent when Ethnotech was telling, and
Mm,
honestly, people around me had no idea how to interpret it because it was
mm,
new to that particular kind of festival environment. It was music, it was dance, and now we see it. I mean, Ethnotech is amazing. And I learned a
mm.
long time ago, for example, Native American tales. Um, and there's over 750 Native American, tribes that are recognized, and that I wasn't ready for Native tales. I was banking it up against American sense, whatever that is. Things happen in three instead of seven or 11 or 13. Sometimes
Right.
we have to be ready for the traditional tale. Do you believe that?
I do. And some of it is knowing your audience because there are differences. And if I think Elizabeth Ellis has a really lovely way of putting it. The audience has to be prepared. You get to them with humor, and then you can bring the poignant or the strange or the unusual. I do think I would have a different reaction to if I was seeing storytelling in Japan or in Africa. It wouldn't be a language I was familiar with,
Right.
but it is so worth experiencing. Something in storytelling that I love deeply is how this is an experience that is individual. I try not to go into too much detail with my stories so that your world that you're creating, the images you're seeing are yours. And if it's important for you to know that the princess has red hair, I'll tell you she does. But if it's not, she can have whatever hair color she wants. It's not my business.
Exactly. And it was never defined.
Right.
And we have freedom when we're telling.
Yeah.
And you've practiced what you're saying, that and we've even talked about it, listening to people from Elizabeth Ellis to Janice Del Negro, but now we're going to talk about Rachel Ann Harding. And it's from all the listening that, if you're like me, it's because I listened to giants, I've listened to wonderful tellers, that I'm able to practice the art.
Mhm.
And it's still, that never stops. We continue to listen. um,
Mhm.
you're going to be on debut,
I am.
which is unlike any experience, at least that I know of, where you're going to tell a story publicly for the first time ever. You're allowed to whisper to your partner, but not tell the whole thing. I'm not the storytelling police, but we're going to have, a public. There's beauty
Mhm.
in the first time. Um,
Mhm.
and so, keeping that in mind, why do debut?
I think it is because it is the celebration of the first time. I think for so many shows, when you're bringing something out for the first time, you don't want to tell people it's its first outing because there's that concern of, oh, people are going to judge it and they're going to pick it apart and they're going to listen to it like it's the first time. But there's such a power in people being able to listen to it like it's the first time and saying, this is new, you know, let me know what your experience was.
And share the comments and kind of build it together, because often, some storytellers said that storytelling can be an isolating business, and my
Mhm.
opinion is I don't think so. I don't think it has to be. And there are parts of it, the business end, everything else, but I think storytellers need to work a little more together. What do you think?
I found that's been one of the most like biggest times of growth. I don't know how it is for tellers who have been doing this much longer than I have, but I found working with Janice has been amazing to have her eyes on my words and knowing that this is something that she'll be looking at from her perspective and long experience. I know will make a better story. So I think it's in collaboration. Cooper Brown and I tell together as Stories with Spirit. But because we collaborate, there's so many pieces of his mind that are in my story and vice versa. You just become a better teller because it's working with more paint. It's working with more options.
And Cooper makes different choices, and you make different choices. Might even be the same story. I know you've been playing with like same versions of Tales, which is
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating. We want to see that more and promote it. And the whole idea. The other component of debut is that to play, we're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes just playing together. How do you feel about? Do you work with play? I think you've already kind of said it, or hinted at it. But let's just ask you straight out. Do you play?
Sure. There is a lot of play in this, especially when something's so new and you're trying out voices for the first time, when you're trying out scenes, how to set up a scene, how to get into one, how to communicate about the characters. So a lot of it can be play, and so, like you said, it can be very isolating at times because you're in. For me, I'm in my bedroom looking at myself in the mirror, making voices. My partner will walk in and listen to me talk to myself, and then he'll walk back out.
My wife's used to
Yeah.
it. and, and you need to have a symphony. We see the sounds behind you. You need the orchestra of working the story. I don't want to give you the words, but this is the way that I think it has to be alive. There's nothing wrong with writing it down,
Mhm.
but you need the full effect. And I think
Yeah.
playing with someone like John Estelnegro or even myself or someone, again, we'll have different vision, different direction, but all in play. I work for you.
Well, for me, I see things so visually. So even if I'm writing it down, there's a different pathway between my words and the image of where I'm trying to go than what I'm seeing on the paper and trying to communicate. And so the paper helps, especially if I know this is the way I want it to go, but I have to have really clear images. And so I think that's one of the things I love to play with is what was I seeing at that point, and this is what wasn't clear for the audience is also amazing. If an audience member says, well, I don't know how this person got from here to here, I might realize that I completely failed to mention the horse or something like that.
How's he writing? I don't understand.
It was magical.
It just appeared out of nowhere.
It happens in fairy tales.
Oh, exactly. Anything can happen in fairy tales. And then what you see, but also what I would see
Mhm.
unveiled to you. This is what I saw. This is how big the guy with the horseless wonder of the top hat, or whatever. And the fun is,
Right.
in play, we can take risks. We can have fun.
Mhm.
We have to be in a state of play. And sometimes when we write, we script ourselves. When we're
Mhm.
not, I call it word dancing. We're not ready to dance in that world yet to write it down. Let's live in that symphony of sound. Let's live in that symphony of play, of working together, of moving and making measure. Um,
Mhm.
so, have you thought about what story you're going to tell?
So I've been flirting with the idea of the story of King Midas,
Oh, I love it.
which I there's a lot of unanswered questions for this one is how does it end? As a child, the children's books always have him learning the story and everybody turns back to normal and that's all joyful. In the some of the Greek originals, he starves to death because he can't eat. His daughter stays gold. I mean, it's very much a downer.
And there's reason for downers.
Totally. There's it's sometimes good to like play with that downer side and and so Midas is one that I've been thinking about mostly because it really does have this really strong visceral aspect of hunger he's hungry in the beginning, but it's a more of a greed than a hunger, and then he's hungry at the end and he really understands. But we'll see. That's the one that's been
I love
playing
it.
around in my mind.
It'll be great, whatever one you decide on. But I've actually been attracted to the Midas story too, and the other one is the Pied Piper. There are
Yes.
many ways of looking at the Pied Piper, and
Hmm.
the thing is, you get to play the debut. There's beauty in the first.
There is.
And when is debut? And I'll help you if you don't know.
It is the 28th of March, I hope.
Eastern Standard Time, it would be 4:30. And we'll have links and that type of thing put up. But whether it's Midas, Pied Piper, Jack, or Coyote, and I know there's restrictions on Coyote, but I know that we're just gonna love having you at the playground. We're just We are honored to have you, Rachel. We really appreciate that not only your podcast is broadcasting traditional tales, but your heart is. I mean, I see it in everything that you do. And we're going to get to see it on the 28th.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for the invitation. This is really, I'm excited about this. I'm excited that people get to see. I think this is in some ways getting to be with the storytellers in a little closer to each other's world. And sometimes as listeners and storytellers, we can feel like I'm the storyteller and you're the listener. And this is a way for us to have a bigger world, a bigger dialogue, as well as getting to play with our stories and play with each other and reflect on how these are just beautiful pieces of art.
And you'll get to hear two other tellers, and sometimes you get all caught
So
up and you're
excited.
like, and you'll get to give comments if you want to. And Rachel, even though you just did it, I'm going to let you have the last word. Let me try to fade myself out if I can by hitting there you go. Rachel Ann Harding will have the last word.
So thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for debut, and I hope whoever's watching this will come to the event on the 28th of March at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
4:30.
4:30 Eastern Time, close. and I'm so pleased to be invited, and hope you'll come play with us in the world of storytelling.